This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewalt, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. And this week, I'm joined by a new co-host, but an old familiar face to all your viewers, and that's Jerry Strickmatter. Jerry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Charlie.
Jerry, it's so nice to have you as a co-host today. Of course, Jerry, you are a board member of Susquehanna Valley Center, and you are the president and CEO of Jerry Strickmatter Associates out of Lancaster, I believe. Is that not right?
Or I try to keep a low profile, high production. You can just call it a senior associate.
Oh, okay.
For Jerry Strickmatter Associates. Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, speaking of high profiles, we have a very high profile person when it comes to state infrastructure, which continues to be one of the major concerns of Pennsylvania, having more bridges than any other state in the union, having more roadway than state roadway than all of New York, New Jersey, and New England together. And that's Dave Sanko, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors. Dave, welcome back.
Thanks, sir.
Welcome back.
Good to see you. Thanks.
We promised to have you back a few months ago to talk about how this budget was unfolding and what the infrastructure situation would look like here in this forthcoming year, in this forthcoming funding year. Your organization has asked for additional funding for local roads and bridges for a long time. Some people would question, why shouldn't the money be put into other things? Why should we spend more money on roads and more money on bridges, Dave?
Well, I think the road and bridge infrastructure in Pennsylvania is not only the lifeblood of the economy, it's also a critical component of public safety. There are 117,000 miles of roads. Local government maintains clearly about two-thirds of those, 70,000, 77,000 plus.
I don't think people realize that. No, do you find that?
I think you're right. I think when it snows, people just expect that there's a truck going to come along the plow, and they oftentimes assume that it's PennDOT. And PennDOT does a remarkable job on the 40,000 roads that the state's responsible for, but local government is responsible for almost twice as many roads.
And with it's remarkable the public safety that you provide to everyone, and especially when we have bridges in such disrepair. How many local bridges are there that are weight restricted, and worried about having fire trucks be able to get to help families? How many are restricted now?
There are a lot. The state requires that all bridges in excess of 20 feet be inspected, but there are a lot of bridges that are under 20 feet, and that's an even more difficult inventory to come up with. But there are an awful lot of bridges, and clearly a third. I think Pennsylvania has more structurally deficient bridges than any other state in the country. And we've got to get on top of it and got to get them fixed and up to par before something bad happens. We shouldn't have to wait for a Minnesota-like incident where a bridge goes down, or a school bus collapses under a bridge, or a fire truck can't get to a fire and somebody dies. We have the opportunity to avoid catastrophe, and we ought to take it.
I know we've been doing more with less, and you've been doing a fantastic job, so I'm very thankful that you provided this safety for us with meager new revenues over these many years. But how are you able to do that? Is that through the agility program? Working with PennDOT, working with others? Are there some of these safety features that you've going out and sort of like a leader for the country?
Sure.
All your townships?
I will tell you, I think you'll find that the township officials have been figuring out how to do more with less for longer than anybody who's been talking about it in Harrisburg, and certainly anybody who's talking about, I'm not even sure they're still talking about it yet in Washington. But they've been doing it through, years ago you've probably seen roads have stopped getting repaved because you just can't afford to, and they'll tar and chip. There have been new innovative ways to partner with PennDOT through the agility program, but also in working with some of the engineering firms to come up with some new best practices, some new bridge building opportunities. Just a whole variety of things that have tried to make do with what you have to provide the level of safety, and to recognize that look, the funding hasn't been coming from Harrisburg for transportation in many instances, and local taxpayers can't afford to have their local taxes raised to pay for it.
Well, Dave, last year, in the last administration, excuse me, you find that we thought we had an answer to infrastructure transportation financing, of course, Act 44, and when the federal United States Department of Transportation struck that down, and we're placing all this debt on the Turnpike currently. We're running the Turnpike into bankruptcy as they pay for all the road repairs and for mass transit in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia. Now we find Governor Corbett has a new idea to fund infrastructure. We may not have that implemented yet, but what do you think of the plan? What's your reaction to at least having the idea out there?
I think it's a good start. I mean, that there is executive level interest that is now supplemented with legislative interest means that everybody in Harrisburg has recognized that there's a problem and it's time to tackle it, which is positive. The governor's proposal is largely premised on raising the artificial cap on the oil franchise tax that was put in place many years ago when everybody thought gas will never, ever, ever reach $1.25 a gallon. Well, we're living in apparently never, ever land. And it's there and it's well beyond that. And in many instances, that just means that the oil companies have not been, it's not a new tax, they've just not been paying the tax on the fuel they've been selling.
The other thing that complicates it is the fact with fuel efficiency, which is great, that there's less gallons bought, for miles driven or, roads, harmed, by people driving more with less product. Well, that's been taxed in the past. But under the current proposal, would your, township supervisors be asking for a change, or, you say it's a good start? How good a start is that? Is it about 2/3 of what you need, half of what you need?
Well, I think it's a good start because it's the first documentable piece of legislation that's out there. We will the governor's Transportation Funding Advisory Commission report last year identified about a much larger number. $2.5 billion in needs. This is 1.8. The report before that said 3.5 billion. So it's 1.8 is a good start. It's not enough. Everybody acknowledges that it's not enough. How you get there with additional funding is challenging. But I think the one thing that we've heard from a lot of legislators on the Hill is, it's a big problem. We haven't addressed it in a while. We're going to address it now, and we don't want to hear about it again. So this is going to be maybe my only vote in a decade. Make it a good one. Ask for what you need. So I suspect there'll be probably a number higher than the governor's proposal.
Mm-hmm. Dave, from the township supervisor's perspective, what are the three main criteria that are necessary outcomes to fund transportation in the Commonwealth in your mind?
I think we've long argued that the transportation funding from a local perspective needs to be first a stable funding base. Secondly, that it be dedicated into a fund that cannot be rated. And third, that we aim to go back towards the target of all of that funding, 20% of the funding being able to go to local governments. That was the target for years, but hasn't been reached in the last couple decades. And at the end of the day, I don't think that a 20% ask is too awfully much when you're charged with being responsible for 64% of the highways.
Is this proposal in line with other states and what they're doing? When you say that it's a good start, are there other things that you would recommend to add in order to get that 20% funding level up? Is there a list of other options that you would say that should be looked at with this funding proposal? I
think that we have long supported, and townships have long supported, a broad menu of options. That this not be, look, it's going to be a costly venture, but it not be unfairly put on the back of any one component in the pool. So, the franchise tax is part of it, perhaps tolling is part of it, public-private partnerships are part of it, perhaps fee increases are part of it. If you think about what we pay for our driver's license, $36 a year, and and that's really what we pay to use this vast transportation infrastructure. And yet, when we think about what we pay more than that for our cell phone in a month. We pay more than that for our cable TV in a month. And those are much bigger infrastructure. So I think we've got to be serious about recognizing that if we want bridges to withstand the weight of a fire truck to be able to come and save somebody's life, that we're going to have to pay for it.
Right. Well, to follow up on that, with another area, as you said, if this is going to be a once and done for 10 years, if that's what the General Assembly is looking at with the governor's proposal, then should it be looked at? Do you think your township supervisors and your constituents would be looking at a miles driven tax rather than putting it all on one fuel, especially as people have electric cars, people will be going to natural gas cars? Shouldn't those people who go over those same bridges that you want to protect, shouldn't they be paying some sum that would be equal? Is there a way to bring that into the discussion now?
Actually, the alternate fuel vehicles, be they natural gas or electric, the Department of Revenue is collecting a tax from them now. There haven't been that many. I mean, last year I think it added up to a total of less than $250,000 in the whole state. But as we move forward, there's clearly going to be more alternate fuel vehicles, more natural gas vehicles, possibly more electric vehicles. I mean, I walked by a charging station down the street coming into the building today. So I suspect there's going to become more of those. But the big challenge with those vehicles is you need a fueling station before you'll buy the vehicle, and the fueling stations won't build until there are enough vehicles in production to support the fueling station. So there's kind of a
well, that goes with the trucks, because they know their planned routes, they know where they are, and if you took the diesel component, took that off and put all the trucks on the natural gas, how would you get the funds for those? That's something I think that everyone should look at too.
I think there's a variety of options that we're going to have to look at as we move forward. The vehicle miles traveled is certainly an option, but with that comes a couple issues. One, it's not especially fair in Pennsylvania or in areas where people have to drive long distances to work or go to the doctors or go to the schools. But the other unfair advantage of vehicle miles traveled is some privacy issues. I mean, they're talking about putting transponders in your car and knowing how many miles you went and where you went. And there's a couple pilot projects going on, but I think in the western part of the country, in Oregon. But there's some challenges.
Okay, Dave, we unfortunately have run out of time again. So again, we need to ask you to come back and finish. I think Jerry and I have gone through half of our questions, but we have for you. So thanks for coming by.
Thank you.
We'll be with you on the second segment of Behind the Headlines in just a second. Remember to follow us on Facebook and look at our archives on YouTube and thevoiceofpa.net. We'll be right back with the second segment.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals to provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Underwriters of America, a better way for truck insurance. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Penn Waste is proud to be a locally owned business. Since the company's founding in 2000, it has employed many of its neighbors as members of a dedicated team of professionals. Penn Waste is proud of its many contributions to the people of its service area, through support of numerous community organizations such as Christmas Addicts and the Junior League of York. One more way they improve the quality of life where they live and work.
Hi, welcome back to Behind the Headlines. Jerry and I are joined in this particular segment by Steve Hicks, who is the president of APSCUF, the state faculty union that works at the 14 state universities, Millersville, Edinburgh, Shippensburg, Kutztown, and so forth. And Steve, you're the bearer of good news. Welcome back. I believe we've talked for some time on this show about the difficulty that the state system and APSCUF was having in reaching a fair contract for the professors. And a contract has been reached now. There is no, well, I should just stop there and ask you to please tell us about the contract and how you came about finally getting one.
Well, I don't know that I can go very deeply into that, but it is a good place to start to point out that we were at the negotiations table 26 months. That our contract expired July 1st of 2011.
26 months. Is this the longest negotiating period ever experienced by APSCUF?
Yes, that is the longest we've been at the table in our history, which goes back in terms of collective bargaining 40 years. So it was a challenge, but I think we ended up with a fair contract to both sides. It's a sort of contract you expect out of collective bargaining. I mean, people talk about one side or the other always winning, but usually in collective bargaining you end up in the middle, and it's a very middle of the road kind of agreement. It's very fair. It largely mirrors what AFSCME and the other large state unions received in June 2011 in terms of compensation. Which means there was no pay increase at all in 11-12, as you know, Charlie, you're very aware of. It does have small across-the-board increases in the 3 ending years, 1%, 1%, and 2%. And on the other side, we increased the co-pays on several elements of the health care plan to help the state system offset some costs and try and change their health care is a big issue, and the cost of health care, and we tried to defray that a certain amount. And we also eliminated a few distance ed payments, but we kept some too. So that was a trade-off we made. The biggest thing from the faculty's point of view in terms of changes is we put in an element that we get to discuss class size through the curriculum committee in the contract for the first time. And that's important to us, as you know, Charlie, in the classroom. It doesn't give us the power to determine class size, but it does mean we get to provide input on paper, and that if the administration decides to go with a different number, they have to tell us why on paper. And we feel that that's a positive, and it'll create a dialogue, and you know, some of these decisions will be made more out in the open than they have been in the past. And we all recognize that class size has been increasing constantly for the last 20 years. And
my class sizes have gone from 25 to 45.
Right.
Just in the last 3 to 4 years.
Right. The push, all the things we'll probably talk about here in a few minutes about budget and the crunches and doing more for less, you know, all of that is affected. And we'd really like to have some say as to, you know, in terms of the curriculum, what is an optimal class size? How many people should be in that class so the learning experience is the best it possibly can be? And so this provides it, and we're very pleased with that.
And for our viewers, it would be good to let everyone in Pennsylvania know the size and scope of this economic engine, you know, why we're happy to have this contract settled, happy to have our distinguished faculty, you know, not having to worry about this. But could you go on and tell our viewers a little bit about the, you know, the huge size and depth and breadth across the Commonwealth?
Well, the state system's budget is about $1.5 billion, just their E&G, not even their auxiliaries. It has an impact somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 billion a year in the Commonwealth. It's the 13th largest employer in the Commonwealth. So it has a huge economic impact. And one of the positives, of course, of having a contract agreement reached without a strike is you don't disrupt all that economic opportunity. But the other thing is my members, and Charlie's one of them, it's very much their vocation being in the classroom. I mean, they don't want to be out on strike. They want to be in the classroom educating students. teaching them about political science or English or mathematics. And they want to be doing that because they want to change students' lives. And we do a lot of that. Currently, the largest major across the state system is business. And in Pennsylvania these days, that's not terribly a surprise, but it may surprise people because we were normal schools, and people think of us as education as our primary major. But anymore, they're only third behind business and the health sciences. We have almost every institution has a quality nursing program. We certify more nurses than anybody else in the Commonwealth. And in this day where healthcare, either we just talked about in terms of the contract, but the governor's talking about Medicaid. All those healthcare issues are so important to us. It's such a huge part of the economy. We're trying to help with those kinds of professionals.
And following up with the numbers, how many students are you touching and families, and how about the faculty? It's thousands of faculty.
We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 faculty at 14 state-owned institutions. There are 115,000 students. We have 500,000 plus graduates. The best thing about the system in terms of the governor and the legislature and the Commonwealth is almost 80% of our students stay in Pennsylvania and get jobs in Pennsylvania after they graduate. So we are the home institutions of higher learning, and we provide the educated professionals in your communities, whether it's teachers or nurses or people going into business and running businesses. And we have multiple universities that have entrepreneurial small business centers and help set up small businesses. So,
well, Steve, right after the tentative agreement was announced between APSCUF and the state system, we find that the governor announced his budget proposal for this forthcoming year. And how does his higher education proposal look in comparison to the last 2 years, and from your perspective, from APSCUF's perspective, what are the pros and cons of this particular proposal?
Yeah, it's a very different year this year. If you remember right, 2 years ago in his first budget, the governor proposed a 54% cut to the state system budget. And we did a lot of work to turn that around, and it ended up being 18% cut. I mean, there were rallies on the Capitol steps, rallies on every campus. We did a lot of lobbying, and the legislature really listened and really were supportive of higher education. This year, the Friday before the address, there was a press conference with the higher ed people saying, well, he's proposing flat funding, but he wants higher ed people to keep tuition as low as possible. So that's the deal. So this year our funding is about the same as last year, $412 million. People have joked on the Hill that it's an amazing world where you have press conferences announcing flat funding. I mean, that's the strange world we live in these days. And of course, flat funding is better than an 18% cut, but we're still living with that 18% cut from 2 years ago. And even flat funding isn't a carry budget. The state system's numbers indicate that they needed 2.8% increase to just carry the budget from last year. So if they're not going to raise tuition by any significant amount and keep it as low as possible, they're going to have to find more ways to tweak their budget and make up several $1 million, probably tens of millions of dollars, given the size of the engine. So that'll be interesting to see how that works. I think the other thing about his budget that is concerning to us, I think we're pretty happy about flat funding given the conditions and what we've seen the last few years. But part of his budget has linkages in it, and false choices, if you would, that we have to change the pension plan to generate $170 million approximately to make the budget that he proposed balance. And we're a little concerned if the legislation doesn't pass with that $170 million. We all know higher ed is the discretionary pot that so often is reached into when there are shortfalls. So that's a bit concerning. on top of the fact that just the pension itself issue is concerning. But we
Another big
really
issue
hate to
have-
see some trade-offs. That
Right.
would be
And another
concern.
big issue you have too is with federal funding and the uncertainty of that. Can you go in for our viewers? You know, what you have to live with without trying to make your budgets.
Right. I mean, this, we're taping the week
In the last 2 minutes.
We're down to 2 minutes. Great. The sequester happened last week, and the state system gets somewhere in the neighborhood of $180 million from the federal government. So if that 5% carries over, that's a pretty big impact. Fortunately, a big part of that $180 million is Pell Grants, which aren't supposed to be touched the first year. But the biggest student impact is on work study. There's a big cut in work study, the 5% plus, and we have 5% of our students on work study. So that's a concern that they're going to have to go out and get another job or borrow more money, which is a major issue with our people.
We don't want to let you go. In the last minute or the last 45 seconds, can you tell us a little bit about the tenure of the Chancellor? John Kavanaugh, of course, has been our Chancellor, only the third Chancellor we've ever had.
Right.
He's left at the end of February. We're going to have a new one. How would you assess the tenure of our third Chancellor?
Well, I think since I don't have a terribly long time, Dr. Kavanaugh is confronted with a lot of tough problems. I mean, we talked about the budget issue. Nobody foresaw those kinds of things when he started 5 years ago. So he had a lot of challenges. I think in terms of policy, faculty had a lot of concerns with the direction he wanted to go in terms of distance ed and experiential learning. We want to be more judicious than he seemed to want to be, but he was leading in those kinds of directions. And it'll be interesting to see over time as we look back what his legacy is going to be.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Appreciate having Dr. Hicks with us.
Thank you.
And follow us on Facebook. Be sure to take a look at our archives on YouTube, and of course, the Voice of PA. We'll be with you again next week. We look forward to seeing you then. Stay tuned.